Okay, so we're going to talk about ways to get into business, all right? Most of you here, I'm guessing, are here to start from scratch. I've done this for 15 years, so I've seen this, I understand that type of a message. But I want you to be aware that there are other options to getting into business. And here they run the risk of a risk continuum. Buying somebody else's business is certainly an option. Right now, there are huge numbers of baby boomers, like myself, who are saying, listen, it's time for retirement, I need to sell my businesses, I'll cash out, I'll turn that over to somebody who's younger, understands the newer markets, and can take that business to the next level because I want to go retire out. That doesn't mean that you're buying somebody else's piece of garbage. We have a thing called due diligence. We'll weed the chaff from the wheat, and we'll figure out if you have a good business that's purchasable, that kind of stuff, to go out there and do that. But it's right now very, very popular to buy an existing business. Now, people say, well, listen, I don't have that kind of money to do that. Well, and ironically, in many cases, that's what the seller has to face with. And the seller carries back a note. And you pay the seller instead of going to a bank or getting some equity to go ahead and fund that particular business. That seller becomes your banker because, quite frankly, from a tax perspective, it's better for him to take that money over a longer period of time. He pays less taxes on it. All right? The second part of that is, if you think that the business isn't going to be successful, we have things like earnouts. So it says, oh, you think your business is going to generate $1 million. Well, I'll tell you what, I'll pay this price if it generates $1 million, but if it only generates $500,000, I don't pay you for your business. Or I pay you a fraction of what you are asking for this particular business. Right? By the same token, you might say, listen, if it does $2 million, then I'll make this pot even sweeter for you. Does that make sense? So we have various ways to acquire businesses that don't necessarily require cash on the barrelhead. Now, another opportunity is buying a franchise. When you buy a franchise, you buy a system, but not all franchises are created equal. But essentially, you buy a system. You do not have to invent that system. All you have to do is find customers that will go in there. And some franchises are very highly branded. You know when a McDonald's goes in, you know what they serve. Right? There's no question about it. It could be a McDonald's in Beijing, or it could be one in Boston. They pretty much sell the same types of things. Right? So you know what that is. Customers are aware of it. You open it up, and on day one, you've got a crowd of people waiting to go into your store. Right? I always talk about Freddy's hamburgers and custards. I live up in Monument. They put one up there. I'd never heard of a Freddy's before, but obviously other people had, because the day they opened, there was a line around the building. Right? Now, there's other restaurants and other businesses, and I want to tell you that franchises, maybe 10% of them are the customer-facing, the business-to-consumer ones that you see. The vast majority of these franchises are businesses you've never even heard of before, because they don't deal with the consumer. They deal with another business. So if you think about your car that you probably drove here today, it's made by hundreds of different vendors. There's a vendor who makes the radio, who sells that to the car manufacturer. There's a guy who makes the tires, who sells that to the car assembly plant that goes off and does that. There's the guy who makes parts of the engine. There's guys who make drivetrains. There's all those pieces are made by other companies that sell to other companies. You don't see them, so you don't even think about them. People need their windows cleaned in office buildings. Right? People need copies made. People need courier services. Businesses need all these services. Each one of these represent various franchise opportunities. And many of those, by the way, business-to-business franchises, are ones that you work Monday through Friday. Most of the other franchises that you think about business-to-consumers are working evenings and weekends. And they usually are working with low-cost individuals who basically, when it snows outside, nobody shows up for work because they're all heading to the mountains to go boarding type of a deal. All right? So, and then, of course, there's the start from scratch, which is why most of you are here. Because, by the way, you see there's a risk continuum here. This represents the most risky one because you have neither got a system to start this with, nor do you have the customers. When you have a franchise, you have a system that's proven but have no customers. And you may get them depending on how well branded that is. And when you buy somebody else's business, you have the customers, existing customers, and a system to start with. You see why the risk factor comes in? I teach a class at the Air Force Academy, and I think this guy put a real visual together. Your business is a plane. It's sitting on the end of the runway. How much equity or capital you have dictates how long that runway is. Your expenses is how much cargo you have in that airplane. Right? You have two choices here. You either have to lighten the cargo so you can take off on a shorter runway, or if you got a lot of expenses, you need a longer runway to be able to go do that. So as we sit out there, when you're buying somebody else's business, I'm buying a plane that's already in the air. I don't have to worry about that. If I buy a franchise, I already have a system that's been designed for the most part that's saying, listen, we know how long it takes. We got the specs. We can, with this airplane, we can get it there. Before you run out of runway, we'll go ahead and allow you to take off. Because most of those franchises will say you need to have a net worth of X before you can start. And that X is what they say, that's how long your runway needs to be able to do that. So they limit you. If you've got half runway, they're not going to give you that franchise because they don't want to be unsuccessful either. And when you start from scratch, you have an unknown airplane and an unknown length of the runway. You really don't know until you start rumbling down. Many of you will take off. Some of you will reach the end of the runway and have to slam the brakes on. Okay?